media space, very accomplished, and just a tremendous, treasure trove of knowledge to be able to, give us and give you guys in terms of insight into the media landscape. So we're very thrilled to have both Rob and Dominique on with us today. Dominique's going to follow Rob's back and forth, and he's going to give you some insight on in terms of his backdrop. But Rob's going to kick it off for us. So Rob, feel free to dive in, man, and just kind of give us an overview of snapshot of your backdrop, how you got to where you were, and obviously the students have some questions for you later.
First of all, I'm glad I'm going before Dominique because she's a tough act to follow. Secondly, glad to see everybody. It's an honor to be asked to join you. Coming to you from Florida, where we live full-time in Connecticut, but we got COVID tested, drove to DC, where I'm from, had Thanksgiving with my parents, and continued on down to Florida. So to avoid winter for a month. So if it's cold and rainy where you are, I apologize. I'm just so delighted to be outside. I'm telling everybody I'm outside. Yeah, so I've been fortunate enough to be at ESPN for 16 years. And before that, I was in newspapers for about 15 years. My current job is Senior Vice President, Editor at Large, which basically allows me to be involved in all sorts of things. Everything from, I was one of the executive producers on The Last Dance, to I executive produced the ESPYs this year. I get involved, I run all of our sort of editorial guidelines and run our editorial board so that when we get into questions about how we tell stories or whether we're doing the right thing ethically around stories, I'm generally the lead editorial voice here at ESPN. Also proud to be the executive sponsor of Pulse, which is our employee resource group for Black and African American ESPN employees. We're fostering a sense of community, mentoring, trying to lift each other up, trying to be in the conversation about people's career paths, et cetera, et cetera. The first and most important thing I would tell you, especially the younger folks on the call, is I had no idea I would have this job when I was 15, 16, 20, 25. I had no idea. The only thing I ever wanted to be was a cartoonist. And I started out as an editorial cartoonist. That's really the only thing I wanted to do. And I was a cartoonist for about 8 years, the first 8 or 9 years that I was in newspapers. I had a comic strip that ran daily and Sunday for 6 years. That's the only thing I wanted to do. How do we get from cartooning to being an editorial voice at ESPN? Mostly it's just, I've had great mentors, right? I've had great people in my life who've come along and said, you're pretty good at this, but I think you could be better if you did this, right? I had one really incredible mentor who gave me a piece of advice that I would definitely give all the younger folks, which is between the time you're 20 and 30, you're going to be 4 different people, right? You're going to fall in and out of love. You're going to have 2 different cars. You might have multiple pets. There's music you're listening to where you're 20, or by the time you're 30, you'd be like, what was I thinking about? That music is terrible.
That's
There's
true.
Clothes you're wearing now.
Very true.
There's outfits you're wearing now that you would never put those clothes on again, but it's okay. You have permission to do a lot of changing and learning and mixing things up. Now, if you know exactly what you want to be when you grow up now, that's great. There's nothing wrong with it. But my example has always been just staying open. You know, it's sort of like I played Division III basketball. I wasn't the level of athlete that Dominique was, but I was a gym rat. I was always around the gym and always kind of listening to people who knew what they were doing. And when I got to newspapers, it's pretty much the same thing. I was just a gym rat. I stayed late hours. I followed people around. I asked a lot of questions. And through the course of that, I learned my first year in newspapering, I was at the Washington Post, one of the biggest newspapers in the world. I was sorting mail. And I knew and I was working terrible hours. I was working 5P to 1A or 7P to 3A. And like, I'd be driving the opposite direction to work while everybody else was coming home from the end of their day. And I knew pretty quickly that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. So I went to graduate school, a year graduate school at Penn State. I got out of there with a lot of learning towards a master's in communications. Took the first job that said that I could be a cartoonist. And I moved out to Danville, Illinois. Does anybody on this call know where Danville, Illinois is? All right, so like if you go as far into nowhere, the middle of nowhere as possible and look around, you're probably in Danville. I mean, Danville was so small, they used to close the schools north of Danville and Hoopeston, used to close the school because it would get really hot, but it wasn't because of the heat. It was because the heat would activate the smell of the cow manure across the street from the school so much that the students couldn't concentrate on school, right? So like that was middle of nowhere. But I met my best friend, a guy named Alvin Reed out there at this newspaper. And B, I just worked and stayed extra hours because there was really nothing else to do. I had a library card. I had a YMCA membership. I had a video rental card. Y'all don't even know what a video rental is. And I had a Sears charge card, and that's about it. And then I had a dog. That was my life. So I had nothing to do but just work and learn and work and learn and work and learn. And the same thing happened when I made the transition from newspapers to ESPN. I was the deputy managing editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer. Now I should say something about the Philadelphia Inquirer. I got to the Philadelphia Inquirer. It was my last full-time newspaper job. I got there in 1997. In 1998, they gave me the opportunity to move into the deputy sports editor job, which was my first job in sports. And on my first day of having the job, I was at a food truck on the corner of 15th and Callowhill Streets in Philadelphia when somebody walked up behind me. Robert King, Stephen A. Smith, do you realize I'm the lowest paid NBA beat writer in a major metropolitan city in the United States of America? That's how he and I met. So I've known Stephen since 1998. I was his boss in 1998. But I left newspapers after being in Philadelphia for 7 years because ESPN recruited me. They'd heard about me through, when Stephen and I were in Philadelphia, we had incredible teams to cover. We had Allen Iverson 76ers. Donovan McNabb was a quarterback of the Eagles at the time. The Phillies were relevant. The Philadelphia Flyers had just been in the Stanley Cup. John Chaney was coaching the Temple Owls, and Temple was on the rise. I mean, it was a great time to be in Philadelphia. So naturally, we came across a lot of folks through the course of covering events, and ESPN heard about me. And so they finally recruited me away after about 3 or 4 years, recruited me away. And once again, I didn't know anything about TV, knew nothing about television, but I did know enough to just be a gym rat and just stay around. After my show, I came in to run a show called Outside the Lines, which was our journalism show. And we were on tape. Once we got done, I would go down to the SportsCenter control room and just sit there and watch them do SportsCenter. And that show moves a mile a minute. Like some of the shows you see during the course of the day are, they're well thought out, they're well planned. The shows Dominique's in, they have great conversations, prep conversations, and then they go with really talented people talking. But with SportsCenter, particularly at night, the 11 o'clock SportsCenter, the midnight SportsCenter, you don't know when games are going to be final, right? You don't know you can't plan for buzzer beaters. You can't plan for comebacks. And even then, like when you're a production assistant at ESPN and you're asked to edit a highlight, you don't know when your game's going to be over, and you don't know if your game's going to be the best game of the night. So the producers who are doing that show are literally making it up as they go along. Ooh, that game looked like it was going to be the best game. We're going to give you 2 minutes for your highlight. Oh, it was a blowout. No, you have only 30 seconds for your highlight. You've got the game of the night. That's got to be a 2-minute highlight. And it has to be ready by 11:02 when the show gets going, right? So the pressure is just completely unbelievable. And the control room moves a zillion miles a minute. And I just stayed in and just watched until things slowed down. And I've been very fortunate. When I got to ESPN, they gave me Outside the Lines and they gave me research to run. I did that for a year, and then they said, we think you can do a little bit more. So we'd like you to run our golf coverage, which meant both studio and event, going to these events. Then they said, we would like you to run ESPN News, which at the time was very different. It was a half-hour news program that recycled every half hour constantly, 24/7 news network. And then they said, after a couple of years of that, we'd love you to run our NBA coverage. So I ran our NBA coverage for the year that LeBron James and the Cavs got swept by the San Antonio Spurs. And from there, I ran ESPN.com. They asked me to be editor-chief of ESPN.com. Then they asked me to also be the lead of the magazine. So I ran all of our story gathering, came back, ran SportsCenter for 3 years. And in those 3 years, we launched the Scott Van Pelt Midnight Show. We launched SportsCenter on the road. We launched a morning view version of SportsCenter, and we did launch the 6 with Michael Smith and Jamel Hill. After 3.5 years, I came back to digital because we were launching ESPN Plus and we were reimagining the app. So I had to come back to digital. And then I took over our storytelling group, which was 30 for 30, E60, Outside the Lines, investigative reporting. Did that for a couple of years, and now I'm in this broader job as editor at large. So I'll just tell you that, ESPN is a place of great ambition, great ingenuity. Like, we're always creating things. We've never been more innovative, or we've never been stretched as much as we have over the last 8 months. Sports stopped. Then we began this critical conversation about the racial reckoning in the country. And then we had this election cycle. So pandemic, social justice, election cycle, and sports slowly coming back, and now still contending with the pandemic. And we were supposed to have a number one and number 2 basketball teams play today. Baylor was supposed to play Gonzaga. Game canceled at the last second because of COVID. So I will tell you that this is a place where we are working all the time, 24/7, trying to be right by sports fans. And on top of that, we're working on really big ideas that are like The Last Dance. So you might have heard we did a deal with Colin Kaepernick and his team. I've been very fortunate to spend time with Colin and his team, looking for a director for his documentary, but also talking about projects that they're going to work on with our group, The Undefeated, that Dominique knows so well. And we have a couple of other big projects in the works with folks like Tom Brady, and a big project on the New York Mets from the 80s. Fantastic film about Maya Moore coming out next year. A documentary that we shot while we were in the WNBA bubble that's going to come out, I think, in February around Black History Month. It just shows what those amazing women did and what their lives were like. And then a few others that I can't really talk about yet, but like of the order of, The Last Dance size. So, long-winded way of saying I have one of the coolest jobs on the planet. I'm very, very grateful, very grateful. And, particularly in this moment, I really feel like this long journey in journalism and media has gotten to a place where I just feel fortunate every day. So I'm gonna stop talking. I'm gonna answer any questions you have about any of the stuff I mentioned, or anything about ESPN you want to know, anything at all. So have at it.
I'll go first.
Yeah, go ahead, Caleb.
I had a question. You said in 1998 is when you got the sports job. What made you want to switch, like, from being a cartoonist to just going straight to sports?
That's a great question. So, like I said, I was a Division III athlete. I've always loved sports. So for whatever reason, no matter where I was working in design or what have you, my desk or my office was right near the sports department. So I spent all my time with the sports department anyway, right? It's just, my fandom was there. So when I got to Philadelphia, I was there to redesign their sports section. That was the job. It's like, reimagine the sports section, work with photo and design, and just create something new. And so I had come to Philadelphia from Louisville. And in Louisville, I was running both our photo and design operations. So by the time I was managing teams already. I get to Philadelphia, they said, we're going to give you a year off from managing people. So redesign the sports section, have fun. Exactly a year after I got there, they're like, okay, your time off from managing people is over. You have a choice. We got 2 jobs that are open right now. There's business editor or deputy sports editor. And I said, I'd like to be deputy sports editor. And one of the reasons I said that, Caleb, was that I had in my head, if I was ever going to be the editor of the newspaper, like the top editor, I had to move out of design and move into a place where I was managing reporters and et cetera, et cetera. So I chose deputy sports editor. I also chose it because I knew it was harder, because, we're on deadline all the time. Now, we now live in a world that is much more focused on publishing to digital first. But in 1998, 1999, 2000, we were focused on putting it in a newspaper first, which meant we had multiple deadlines. You know, there was a version of the paper that went to the outlying part of the state that had to be done by 8 o'clock at night. Well, no games are over 8 o'clock at night. And then the next version that was going to be on the streets had to be done by 10:30. So if the 76ers tip off at 7:30 and go over overtime, you might not make that story into the paper. Like, we were rushing to get things in. Like, literally, there would be writers, and Stephen was among them, who would write a running version of the story and just be sending paragraphs at a time during the game, so that my editing team and I would be actually stitching the story together. That was hard work. And then, like I said, West Coast games go final like 1:30 in the morning. So we were working deep into the night. But I wanted that experience because I felt like, all right, if I do that, somebody's going to regard me as, that's the person that can run page one. That's the person who can run the city desk. That, you know, and so I chose it for that reason. And as it happened, I did go from deputy sports editor to assistant managing editor to deputy managing editor of the paper in about 5 years' time. Like, I moved through pretty quickly. And I was on the path to being editor of my own newspaper when ESPN made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So that's what the change was.
That's super cool. That's super cool.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up question, just stemming around the same thing that you're speaking about. So I'm a filmmaker, photographer, an independent artist. That's the best way I can fully describe myself. And one of the questions that I've always had for myself is, if following, you know, like the route that you followed, where it's under the corporate sort of banner, do you think it's a good idea to explore that? Does it educate you more as an artist to explore, you know, working with these corporates instead of just sticking outside to making your own stuff? Because I want to be an all-rounded, you know, educated filmmaker, not one who just makes narrative stories, but for documentary styles and all that. Well, what's your take on that?
Well, this is going to seem a little long-winded, and I apologize in advance, but the only real benefit of going through the corporate structure is just learning what that is. And a lot of it depends on the culture you walk into and whatever corporate culture you walk into, right? Like, I can tell you the corporate culture of ESPN is very different from, say, the corporate culture of the Gannett publishing, a news publishing group, just very different. And so it's good learning to have, but if you're a creative, particularly in this environment, that's not necessary. You know, the key to being a great creative is to make stuff, make terrible stuff, make better stuff, constantly iterate, putting it in the public sphere so that you can receive feedback and people can see what it is you do. Particularly now with film, because whether it's a smaller platform like Instagram or it's YouTube or whatever medium it is, people can see the work, right? And finished product as a creative is the biggest thing. You know, you gotta make stuff that people can see and see your eye and see your way you tell a story. I don't know that you need the corporate structure to do that. And I do think that, you know, the digital space makes finding other creatives or other people who are interested in your work way easier than it was when I was coming up in the 80s, right? I mean, there are film societies left and right, and there are ways of finding really talented creatives and directors, like picking up the phone and calling them, that didn't exist when I was coming along. When I was coming along, kind of did have to go through a corporate structure to figure out who's who and where the names were, but that's not necessary now. I think, again, it's purely for your education if you want to spend time in that environment. But if you're really committed to being in the creative sphere, just make stuff, share stuff, communicate with those who are doing the work you love. Like, for example, I never finish a book without then going on Twitter and finding the author and thanking the author directly for having written the book, right? That just starts dialogue that'll ultimately lead to places you can't imagine, right? And the same is true for pieces of music or what have you. Like, there is a way of finding those people who do the work you're interested in, learning more about them and getting them to see your stuff.
Thank you for that. That definitely answers my question. Yeah, it's about putting the work in and not really sort of expecting it to happen by joining something. It's about taking the proactive
right.
step.
I mean, I think the corporate jobs still, I'd say this all the time to people, but like when you see a job opening, all that is the hiring manager has said that he, she, or they have a problem. And your response is you're seeing like, okay, here's my opportunity to show that I can solve your problem. But their problem might not be the thing that moves you creatively. You know what I'm saying? Like they're looking to fill a role and have somebody solve whatever gap they have. And that's the way they will see you for a period of time. And if you're a true creative, sometimes that period of time is just too long. Like they might say, yeah, we just want you to do this for a couple of years. You might be like, 2 years? Sorry. So, you know, I just, again, if you're curious about the corporate culture, you know, and depending on what culture you walk into, I can say it's worth the time. But if you're saying like, I got stories I want to tell, I don't really know how to do it yet, but I'm going to be out there and be in the fray, then get in the fray.
We'll take a couple more questions for Rob if you guys have any more questions before we bring Dominique in.
Another one that I wanted to ask, being from 1998 all the way up until now you can kind of answer this question. I know that I could tell that you're like working all day, but like you had to have good time management, you know? So how did you manage your day, like from start to finish, from 1998 to now?
Well, I mean, to tell the full story, my first job was 86 and I was single. You know, I didn't have much in way of money. So, you know, I didn't really have many options. I either worked or hooped. That was like it. Like I had a car that was unreliable. So like I couldn't go too far. Like that was the whole deal. Then you flash forward to the 80s. I met the woman that I would end up marrying and we were double income, no kids. But she knew that like when news was breaking, like I had to go into the office, and she's kind of known that about me since we met, that like, you know, I remember one time we'd ordered Chinese food. We were sitting down to have a nice meal, and there was a mine collapse in central Pennsylvania. And I looked at her and she looked at me and I was like, yep. I got up and went into the office. I was, you know, had to go to work. Then you flash forward to 2004, my son is born. That kind of changed some things, right? Like still had to do a lot of work, but I came to ESPN as a father of a 6-month-old, and ESPN knew about me that I was really focused on being a dad. So, you know, while I worked a lot of hours, I also made sure I could carve out that time to be around the family. And now, I mean, you know, my kids are teenagers. We get 3 kids. They're all teenagers. They're probably all looking at a phone right now. You know, they're kind of self-sustaining. And my wife and I find time to stay fit and do things. She's a tennis player, you know. But, you know, I feel like I've reached the point where I'm kind of more of a boss, so that I don't have to, you know, and I have more control over my time, right? And that's not to say that, you know, I just don't have rhythms to the day. I know what I'm doing when I wake up in the morning. I know what I'm scanning and reading. I also, by virtue of my job, I know ahead of time, as much as 6 months ahead of time, what sorts of things we're doing, what plans we have, right? I know which games I'm going to watch. I don't sit there and watch games all day long, but I knew I was going to spend 20 minutes watching Ohio State play Michigan State. And I know I'll tune in tonight for a couple of things. And I know, I mean, I read a lot of the things we publish online while they're being edited in advance. So I get to stay ahead a little bit. So I have a little more control over my time, right? But it has evolved over time, right? Like the needs of the family are really important. And the other thing about that, Caleb, is if I don't make that clear to people, then the people who work for me don't feel like they can have that time with their families, right? So we're pretty upfront about that. I remember one time when I was running ESPN.com, we had a town hall meeting, and it was the week before Halloween. And so the last thing I left off with was, I have a corner office that overlooks the parking lot. And I know many of the people here have young kids. And I'm telling you right now, I'm gonna look out the window at the corner office at 5 o'clock. I expect to see you walk into your cars, getting home in time for Halloween. Like, it's my job to give people some permission to live their lives, right? It's not, it's my responsibility. So, look, we work in sports. Sports is nights, weekends, and holidays, right? Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
everybody's like, yeah, we just go lay out and watch football. Like, our folks are working. So, I kind of always have had kind of a backwards approach to time. My time is not nights, holidays, weekends. My time is a different part of the day. But, like I said, I have a little more control over that now. But it's a great question.
Denari had a question. Denari, go ahead and unmute yourself. One of our middle school students.
Awesome.
Okay, so my question is, if you were able to go back to change anything in the past, what would you change?
Wow. Well, first of all, I'll couch this by saying it worked out, okay? But if I could change one thing. So when I had that job in Danville, Illinois, I was there for a year, 2 weeks and 3 days. Not that I was counting, but I was there a year, 2 weeks and 3 days. I'd been there about 9 months, and I was invited by the folks who would run the company at Gannett to go to the National Association of Black Journalists Convention in Miami. And I was invited to speak as a first-year Gannett employee, and then I was invited to a dinner that night. So I go to this dinner, and what I didn't realize was the dinner was kind of set up for me to leave Danville and go to Cincinnati to work at a big newspaper, the Cincinnati Enquirer. And the Enquirer editor-in-chief was at the dinner, and a couple other people from Cincinnati were there, and then the lead recruiter from Gannett was there. And so she was talking, and she was like, so we were thinking it's about time to think about your next move. You've been in Danville quite some time. We're ready to think you might want to move on from Danville. I was thinking, oh, thank goodness, at last. And so she said, so we were thinking there are a number of options. There's the Cincinnati Enquirer, and people all kind of sat up. There's a newspaper in Asbury Park in New Jersey. There's a newspaper in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And so I had a girlfriend who was working in Philadelphia at the time. And Cherry Hill is right across the river, Delaware River from Philadelphia. So I'm like, oh, so I say, yeah, I'd love to hear more about Cherry Hill. Like, I didn't even pay attention to the Cincinnati Enquirer people who were like obviously sort of sagging in their chairs. And the next thing you know, the wheels are rolling, right? And I'm going out to interview in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. So I go and I interview, and it goes great. And I come back to Illinois, and then I call my girlfriend in Philadelphia and say, I got great news. I got a job in Cherry Hill. I'm moving out there in 2 weeks. And she said, and I'll never forget this, I'm overwhelmed. Okay. Now, when somebody says I'm overwhelmed in a situation like that, they are not saying I'm so happy, right? Because when I got to Philadelphia, it turns out she had a boyfriend in Philadelphia. So Denari, I was the lonely guy for that first year. It was terrible. And I will tell you right now, I'm glad I mean, technically, if I could change anything, I would have been more receptive to Cincinnati. As it happens, after a year being terribly lonely and destitute, I met my wife. Okay, so it worked out, but I can clearly tell you, don't do that, Denari. Whatever you do, don't do what I did and go halfway across the country for somebody who might not want you there, okay?
Got that.
Hilarious.
That was great.
Janae had one question she would like to ask. It's one of our other community college students.
Okay.
Hi, I was wondering I see you've worked many different positions, from cartoonist to sports. What skills have you learned from all the different positions that have helped you in your job you're in now?
Well, cartooning is storytelling. It's less about drawing than it is about actually having something to tell that entertains somebody. So, and everything that I've done along the way has been informed by storytelling. I've learned a lot about, how to identify interesting characters, how to develop a story, how to write it in multiple ways, right? You write differently for a newspaper than you write for television. Chris Mortensen, one of our great NFL reporters, told me when I got there, because he was in newspapers a long time, he's like, listen, newspaper writing, you write paragraphs, and in TV writing, you write captions because it's connected to video, right? And then, we tell stories in a lot of different ways now. We tell stories across TikTok and stories across, ESPN Plus that are multi-part documentaries. So everything is really, my entire career has been informed by being around people who really know how to tell a story, know how to identify how to tell a story, and are really comfortable telling it in multiple forms.
Great, great. So I guess this is a good time to transition so that we stay cognizant of the time factor. Rob, thank you so much for that overview. Extremely insightful. Really appreciate your feedback and your history and obviously your knowledge that you bring to this equation. We're super fortunate to have you here, and we appreciate you. We'll transition with Dominique up next, and obviously, Dominique, you can give the backdrop to your how you got to where you are now. Obviously, you have a very extensive background. You were at the University of Maryland, College Park, Harvard Business School, president. It was interesting to me. You were the president of the Players Association at the NFL, but then you were also the chief operating officer at the National Basketball Players Association. So I'm really looking forward to hearing kind of that transition process. I know with Marcellus as my business partner and his manager, we often amplify his backdrop, right? How he's been able to pivot from growing up in Compton, South Central to Columbia University to the NFL and now in the media. And obviously you have a very comparable backdrop as well. So looking forward to hearing kind of your story and how you got to where you are now.
Sure. So I think the kind of through line and constant from what I was listening to what Rob said, and I appreciate that I was here because I think I picked up and learned a lot of things from being able to listen to Rob talk. But the through line, I think, is that you really don't know what your future's going to hold. And I think you started with saying, like, even if you know exactly what you're going to do or you don't know exactly what you're going to do. So, like, I was one of the kids who knew exactly what he was going to do from the time I was 6. Like, I'm going to be a professional football player. And as foolish as that sounds for a 6-year-old, it like actually worked out for me. But the fact of the matter is, even if you are a great Hall of Fame professional football player and you play for 10 years or more than that, then you are in your mid-30s and you got a whole lot of life to live and a whole lot of jobs to have and a whole lot of everything. And the world is kind of impossible to predict which direction it's going to go in, how the workforce is going to change, what skills you're going to need. And the thing that Rob did, and I also did, I don't know if Rob did it consciously or not, but it's just amassed a ton of skills and amassed a bunch of relationships and amassed a bunch of experiences, because you never know which one or when you're going to need them, which ones you're going to need. And also, it's not just about going after success and all that stuff. I think there was a time in my life, and I know everyone thinks being a professional athlete is like a dream job, and it was a dream job. But as I got older and got better perspective and got more experience, it wasn't a dream job. Like, it got to a point where I recognized the business for what it was, and it became less of a game. And I got an award from the NABJ for a piece that I wrote a few years ago about how stressful contract year was for me, because I was coming into my own as a young adult, and I'd played 3 years in the NFL, and I was a 3rd-round pick, so I made good money, but it wasn't like life-changing money. And I knew that this was my only opportunity to make that real life-changing money in my contract year. And that whole season was the best season I ever had, but it was the most depressed I'd ever been, because I realized how I'd kind of mortgaged a lot of my future away when there was time when I could have been doing internships or participating in things like what you guys are participating right now. And times I could have been building relationships, learning new things. Like, all that time I just poured it all into being an athlete. And I realized that if I didn't have a good season, I was likely to be out of the league. And then with not as much money as I would have liked to have, and a lot of life left to live. So I think that year was tough for me. Fortunately, I played well and I got the contract that I was hoping for and all that other stuff. But one thing that happened in that time period for me was like the kind of love and fun that I was having playing the game. Like, it got confronted with the business and the real life aspect of it. And I kind of was like, it's not really a dream job. It's a great opportunity, but it's not a dream job. It was like the stakes were so high. So I say that to say that we all don't know what's going to change in our lives, how even we're going to change. And I talked about how the world changed and the workplace changed, but to Rob's story that he kind of ended on, we also change, and the things change around us, and it's hard to predict that. And I'm married with 3 kids right now, and when I first started dating my wife, I was sure pretty early on that I was going to marry her, in part because she was like incredibly smart and accomplished and talented. And I was like, all right, well, we're going to be a power couple because I think those same things about myself. But she changed from that time and I changed from that time. And I think we couldn't have predicted that we would have grown in ways that I think fit better now than we thought. But if she would have become the adult that I kind of thought I wanted, we would have been a terrible match, because like the ambition and the competitiveness in me that I needed to feed, that sent me off to be president of the Players Association and to go on to business school and to go on from there to the MBA PA, like that stuff wouldn't have meshed well with my wife at the time. When we got married, she was at Harvard Business School. I mean, at Harvard Law School. And I ended up going to the business school later on. But if she was going to be some partner at a firm or something like that, working the hours that Rob was going to work, or that Rob worked back in his early days, like it would have been hard to have a family, and hard for us to have a relationship that would be as rewarding and healthy, frankly, as it is now. Though, of course, it's not perfect because nothing's perfect. So I know we didn't necessarily get on here expecting to have relationship conversations, but Rob opened that door. So we're there now. And I think we all think we know everything. We all think we can project everything. And I suspect that many of you who had the initiative to get involved in something like this are type A, outgoing, and want to control things and want to succeed. And I know Rob's like that, and I'm like that. I'll just have you know that you can't. All you can do is be prepared, as prepared as you possibly can. And the best way you can do that, it's hard to prepare for something that you don't know what's going to happen. And I just spent the first few minutes of this saying that you can't really predict too much of anything. The way you prepare for that is to try to prepare for everything. And if something strikes your fancy and is a bit interesting to you, and you have the time to get involved in it, then do that. And like I would have, cartooning, like that's a interesting thing. Like it's not something you hear of people like, hey, I want to start my career in cartooning because I want to be a millionaire. I suspect that Rob went into cartooning because he loved cartooning, and his career has worked out quite well after that. So it's hard to say that not being strategic is somewhat strategic, but the older I get, the more I believe that, like, and it's easy for me to say now that I've made a good amount of money and I'm comfortable. But the money, if that's driving your decision making and driving your ambition, you're going to be ultimately disappointed and unhappy, because, and especially now as a dad, I don't spend any money. Like the money that I make, my wife spends and the kids spend. And like I got a TV, I got a functional toilet, I got some fresh food, I got an Xbox, and I got Wi-Fi. And I mean, at this point in my life, it's all I really need. I'm pretty happy. And I look and I derive a great deal of like happiness from seeing how happy they can be. And I think you guys are all relatively young and may not fully understand that yet, or maybe you do. I don't know what your relationships are, but that's a crazy thing to wrap your head around, to understand that getting a brand new Lamborghini would not make me nearly as happy as being able to buy my daughter $100 worth of comic books, which her birthday just passed, and I bought her a bunch of comic books because she's like really into comic books. And I bought her a bunch of like Marvel, Disney, ESPN. They do these young women's comic books, and she's 10 and she really likes to read, and she was so happy. And I was like, oh, and she just gave me a big hug and was like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I was like, wow, that's pretty good feeling. And if somebody rolled up with a fancy Lamborghini, that was like my dream when I was a kid. It was like, my parents saved this piece of art that I made in like 6th grade, where it said I was going to be a professional athlete and marry a supermodel. And it was a picture that I drew of me standing in front of a Lamborghini. And if you get like 10-year-old me and tell them that you'd be much happier spending $100 on comic books about Squirrel Girl than you would be about getting a Lamborghini with 20-inch rims on it, then I would have laughed at you and said that you're stupid. But so I don't know. I didn't really have remarks planned, but if I were to theme all of this, it's like you can't really predict the future. You're not even going to know what the world's going to be like, let alone what you're going to be like. So get all the experiences you can and let um, and be driven and steered by the things that bring you joy and the things that get you excited. And as cliche as it sounds, the things that make you want to get up and go to work and make you comfortable. And through all that, it's not always going to be easy. It's going to be way more hard times than you can anticipate. So pushing through those times are going to come. So don't take my advice as saying, oh, this part ain't fun, I quit. No, those are the times you need to push forward, and it's going to be a little easier when it's something you care and love about and you love. And yeah, so to what you said at the beginning, Brandon, just to give you a little understanding of how my career was so unusual, was like I mentioned, I wanted to be a football player. All that worked out. I went to the NFL my second year in the league. Rod Smith was a receiver on the Broncos, and he was really well respected. Union guy. In my second year, he saw something in me and said, "You're gonna be our union rep for the team." So I became union rep for the team very early on. At that point, I got involved in all the union meetings, and I enjoyed it, and I wanted to take on a more leadership role. So I got elected to the executive committee, and then random things happened. So we're in a lockout. I happened to tear my ACL through this time also, which was terrible, obviously, but it also gave me an opportunity to be more involved. And my first daughter was born at that time, and also the CBA negotiations were going on. So I was at all the negotiations because I couldn't go to practice, couldn't go to games, couldn't do that. And in those negotiations, that's when I sat down across from the team owners who are billionaires and like masters of industry. And in that moment, it was my first real exposure to people like that. And prior to that, I thought of them as like super geniuses. Like, how could you become a billionaire without being like crazy smart? And like the same way that like you're not going to go grab somebody off the street and drop them in a football game because it's the elite of the elite. I thought they were like that, and no, they aren't. They're not dumb. Obviously, plenty of them are pretty smart, and many of them work hard. Some of them were just lucky, to be honest, and some of them are the children of other people who are just lucky. But it was the first time that I thought for a second, like, oh, I could do this, and I enjoyed it, and that's what drove me to go to business school. And then while at business school, another random thing happened where Billy Hunter, the Players Association and the NBA moved on from Billy Hunter, so they started doing a search for the next executive director. So I was interviewed and made it to one of the later rounds, but given that I was relatively young and had not a ton of experience, they went with more experienced executive director, but they recommended to her that I be a part of the team. And so that's what happened, and I got on there. And then again, I went to New York and lived there, and I thought this was the job that I wanted because the competitiveness in me was like, this is a big salary, this is a big title, I can walk around with my chest out. But by then I had 2 kids and one on the way, and I was riding the subway in New York to work at like 7 in the morning and getting home at 8 at night and working all day. And then my wife was in New York with 2 kids and pregnant pretty much by herself. And then I was kind of like, what the hell am I doing? Like, my wife's unhappy, which means that I'm unhappy. And you young men will learn that at some point. And maybe the same is true for young women. I don't know. But that is kind of becomes the center of the household, and the sun, which the rest of us orbit around, and how warm we are is how happy that most important person is. And so like, she was unhappy, and I don't know that it was necessarily impacting the kids, but it was impacting me. And I guess I also wasn't all that happy in the work that I was doing. I liked that I could walk into places and say I'm a COO, and I liked that I was getting paid good money, but got to the point where I was being a little bit more honest with myself and realizing that if those are the reasons why I'm excited, then it's not a good reason to go to work. And so I resigned from that, and then I started doing something that I've always enjoyed doing, which is writing. and doing like some freelance stuff for a couple of things. I wrote one piece that got some attention, and from there, an agent contacted me, and another random thing happened. The intersection of race and sports became really more important, and the Undefeated was started with ESPN, and it just so happened that the Undefeated was going to be based in DC, which is where my wife and her family's from, and where we were planning to move back to after we left New York, and all that came together. And the one last thing I'll hit on is that Rob talked about how we spent a lot of time at ESPN talking about the kind of country's racial reckoning during this coronavirus. And that just kind of speaks to what I feel like has been the theme of this conversation is you never know what skills you're going to need, and you never know what you need to be ready for, which is why you need to be exposed to as much as possible. Is I didn't know, like it's always been something that I've written about and something that I've cared about and read about and been engaged, like issues of race in our country. There was no way for me to predict that the most important subject on ESPN, especially after we moved on from Jamel Hill, this summer, the most important subject on ESPN was race in this country and politics. And I was one of a few people on air personalities at the company that I thought was comfortable addressing those things. So the summer happened to be one of the most difficult and challenging because I was working really hard, and the things that we were talking about felt important to me in a way that the games don't feel important. So like, if I'm being completely honest with you, in preparation for a first take where we're going to talk about the NFL playoffs, I'm going to prepare. But like, if I get a stat wrong, or if I make a wrong prediction, we're moving on. But I know that ESPN, the people who are watching ESPN, many of the people who are watching ESPN, this subject matter is not something that they actively go and look to engage with. So in those moments, I recognized that the work that I was doing was more important than it ever might be or ever has been. The idea of these, of certain people being confronted with something that they wouldn't seek out. And this is maybe the first time that they're going to hear about it. And that's really important to me. So I don't know, I'm rambling, but I think I try to tie it all together, and I think we can move on to questions now.
That was great, Dominique. We appreciate that backdrop. Definitely, some deep depth there that we can all build on. Students, do you guys have questions for Dominique?
I have a question.
Anybody, not just students, anybody.
I have a question. So at a very young, I'm sorry?
No, go ahead, Million.
Okay, at a very young age, you decided that you wanted to be a professional football player. So for someone so young, how was it, or like, how was the experience, or what was it like having to build a sort of network of people to help you get to that goal?
Yeah, I was fortunate. Obviously, I think thinking back on it now, it's something that I've said a bunch of times, is I think I don't know how much my parents really believed me when I was 6 and I was like, I'm going to be a professional football player, but they treated it like it was a real thing. And my dad took that. I remember very clearly. He said, if you set a goal, you need to do something to get you closer to that goal every day. And now that I'm an adult and a father, I realized that he wasn't trying to help me get to the NFL as much as he saw an opportunity to teach me a lesson. And that story ends in a kind of funny way, because that night I did sit-ups. I put my feet under the bed to hold my feet down, and I did sit-ups until I couldn't keep the food in my stomach anymore. It was coming out of both ends. Frantically, and then I guess I kind of learned a lesson about moderation at that moment also. But it's rare that those lessons stick with you, and it's something that has kind of stuck with me all the way up until when I decided I wanted to go to business school. I was like, all right. I took the GMAT, which is like the entrance exam, and I was terrible at it. So it took me 2 years, honestly, of studying and taking the GMAT, and also, again, relationships. I think my my recommendation letters helped quite a bit, but it took a long time because obviously it's foolish to think that I could walk off a football field and and like be ready to go into business school, the one of the best in the country right away. So it's something that served me well throughout everything I've ever tried to accomplish in my life, is like understanding that you're not going to hit a switch and it's going to be hard and you're going to have to work really hard every day to take a little step closer towards it.
Anybody
I
else?
had a question. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Caleb.
Okay. I had a question as well. Before you got to the league, I know you went through the process of getting an agent. And when you did have that agent, did you guys have discussions like about what you wanted to do besides football?
Not really. I mean, the agents, I had the same agent the whole time I was in the league, and I have like a sports media agent now. So like I understand their value and I appreciate them. But I mean, they're doing a job, and I'm they don't care about me personally necessarily. I think after lots of years, you develop a relationship. But one of the things that I realized early on in my football career is that it's more important for the agent to have a good relationship with the general managers and the teams than it is for them to have a good relationship with me necessarily. Because I'm in and out of the league. They're looking for the next one. But the value is for them to have that relationship there. So like I think, and there's not much value for them to protect me going forward and make sure I'm thinking about the right things as far as transition. So I don't expect them to have those conversations. I was fortunate that my parents were engaged and encouraged me to do other things. And again, like my wife was really instrumental, I think, in encouraging me to go after big goals and aiming higher when I was done, because I think I felt some bit of guilt, because like your whole world has to be about you to a degree to get to where you want professionally, and then there's this dynamic where you're like somewhat royalty if you're like made it professional athletes and everyone around you. And I was a third round cornerback. I'm not like LeBron James, which it must be a different planet. But even for me, it was like I go to my local Denver club and I don't have to stand in line, and girls are a little bit friendlier to me than they would be otherwise, and I can afford things, and you go to a car dealership and as a young Black person and they treat you a certain way, but if you go in there and they know you got the money, treat something different. So there's some bit of a bubble that I think that I was aware of the entire time. I didn't shun it. I enjoyed it. I basked in it, but I was aware of it, which when I was done playing it, I had a bit of guilt, and I was like, all right, so I'll be a stay-at-home dad to get out of the way to allow you to chase your career and do things that you want to do. So like I mentioned, my wife was going to one of the best law schools, and I assumed that when she got out, she was going to want to like make this degree work for her. But it would have been an interesting dynamic had she been that person, because I don't know how happy I would have been without being able to feed my competitiveness in some way going forward in my ambition. So sorry, I went off topic a little bit on that question, but I think I might have hit the point. Maybe if not, please tell me, Caleb.
No, you got it. You got it. You got it.
Appreciate it.
I had a perfect understanding. I have another question as well. You said that you were doing internships and building relationships. I assume you started that after football was over. So what internships did you do? Like, how did you choose those?
Yeah, no, maybe I wasn't clear, but I was saying that a lot of time that I would have spent doing that stuff, I spent pouring into football, but I did manage to find some time. So again, I mentioned that I graduated high school early, and which means I started college a little bit early, and then I did all summers and winters. So I ended up graduating college early. So I managed to have time to do an internship at Under Armour while I was still playing college football. And the uniqueness of my position allowed me to get into rooms that most people couldn't get into. So like was involved in a lot of, or I got to meet a lot of high-ranking people in the same way that you guys are here asking questions. When I got an opportunity to ask questions, I'll ask questions and try to get as much knowledge and experience as I could. So I think it's not something that you can fake. Like, you can't just fake an interest, but if there are things that you're interested in or people that you're interested in or whatever, please, by all means, go ahead and go after that, because it's not always like all learning. It seems it's probably pretty obvious. I'm sure you guys know this by now, but all learning is not in a classroom. And the most valuable and most important learning, I kind of came to this understanding after college, is that like the things that I learned in college weren't nearly as valuable as like learning how to go through college. Like, I don't fall back on the knowledge of college as much as I fall back on the ability to cram for a test, or understanding to manage my time, or having the freedom to make the decision to go out drinking or to stay home, and like and sometimes making the wrong decision in that situation and then falling flat on your face. I told this story on TV a couple of days ago because of the Nate Robinson thing, is how I was a cocky ass 17-year-old and I came into college and we had like a little, in the locker room, we had boxing gloves and people would just like, had like a little fight club in the locker room. And we're young and dumb, but being cocky, I came in there and called out who was the best cornerback on the team. I was like, I want to box him. He was 20, I was 17. He had been in the weight program for a number of years and he hit me pretty good and I was dazed. Fortunately, he didn't finish the job. He just stopped and let me stumble into some lockers and that was that. But it was definitely a story that I'm not proud of, but it was one of the lessons that stuck with me. It's like, shut up and do your work. Like, you do the work. And I was like, in my mind, I guess, like, all right, I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna punch the best corner in the team, then I'm the best corner in the team. No, those things have nothing to do with each other. Eventually, I became the best corner on the team, but it took time, it took work, it took lifting, it took hard hours, it took commitment. It's not a one punch thing.
Facts.
All right, so any more questions? Anybody before we round out? Anybody?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question, Rob. I appreciate you also sticking around.
Yeah.
Both of you, you know, the onlyness factor, being the only one in the room, the only Black male, the only person of color, you know, through you all's careers, you've reached some high heights, and not only that, even in college, right, where you were probably the only person of color in certain classes. Obviously, we have a lot of students on here in middle school and college who are looking to rise up and transfer from our community college students to predominantly white institutions, and you're in predominantly white institutions in your career. How have you coped that? What would be some strategies you all would lean towards and lean into our students to kind of get the mindset ready for that potential atmosphere?
Well, I'll go first, and I will tell you a lot of what I learned from my parents. My parents made a big decision when my brother and sister and I were very young. My dad was in the Secret Service, and he took an assignment in Germany. We lived in Bad Godesberg, Germany for 3 years. So it wasn't even about being like the only person. I mean, it was like my parents were just so isolated, right? But they learned through that experience. And by the time we got back to the States, like I grew up in the District of Columbia. We lived with my grandparents for a while, and then we moved into suburban Maryland and went to an elementary school where my brother and sister and I were the only Black kids in the school. And this is 70s. So there was some white kid calling me the magic word virtually every day. And I remember I got in fights a lot. I did a lot of fighting in elementary school up until I got to fifth grade. Fifth grade, we had a new principal show up, Black man named Mr. White. And so 2 days into the school year, this kid, Mike Joswick, called me the magic word and they took him out. So then Mrs. Jones, the playground lady, pulls us apart and takes us to the office. So he sent me into Mr. White's office first. Mr. White says, now, Rob, I heard about you. I know you're a straight A student. I know that you can really achieve a lot of things. What I can't have is I can't have you fighting. All right, are we clear? So yes, sir. They bring in Mike Joswick. And the only reason I know this story is because later on that day, Mike Joswick was telling the story out on the playground. Mike Joswick walked into Mr. White's office, sat down. Mr. White said, Mike, I just got one question I want to ask you. You see any niggers in this room? And Mike said, no, sir. He said, then you don't see any on the playground. You don't see anywhere else. You're not going to say that word again, right? And so for my 6th grade year, like I was at peace. I had a peaceful year. My brother and sister and I had peace. Then I went to middle school. Same thing started up again. All of which is to say that, like, by the time I got through college, because I went to Wesleyan University, where, you know, there's nice diversity in the school. But we're a basketball team. There were 4 of us on the basketball team. We were going to places like Boston, and Boston was terrible back in the 80s. It was terrible. They had so much fighting through, even into college. It was just bad. And I don't say that, I'd say that because it's just fact. There was a lot of physical reaction to being isolated, to being the only one. So when I went to Danville, Illinois, my first day there, I walked up into the newsroom, and that's where I met my friend Alvin Reed. Alvin Reed's his brother from St. Louis, Missouri, Kirkwood, Missouri. And so Alvin said, well, you know, they asked Alvin to help me with orientation. So we go down to the front desk where there was this woman there, white woman at the front desk, who started to tell me about how we were supposed to sign in. There was this board that had pegs with in and out, right? And so she says to me, now I know I'm 24 years old, and I got this job where I'm doing graphic art and cartooning and general assignment reporting. But she says to me, okay, now when you sign in, when you're in, you want this to be over underneath the in word. And then when you leave, you move it over to out. I couldn't resist. I said, wait, let me just see if I have this straight. When I'm in, I move the peg over here to in. She said, yes, that's right. I said, and when I go out, I move it over to out. She goes, yes, that's right. So I said, all right, I want to move it to in because I'm in. She said, very good. Alvin and I walk up the stairs, and I was like, brother, I am in love. I said, I know, man, but like, God. So Alvin saved me for that year, 2 weeks and 3 days. Like, we had so many of these conversations where we'd just be like, oh my God, what are we doing? And then, you know, as it happens, as I got to slightly larger newsrooms, it became clear that I had to be Alvin Reed for people. I had to be that outpost for people that had the sanity just to be able to bring our whole selves to work. And that's been true. Yeah, it's been true virtually my entire career. My name is Rob King, not Robert Luther King. Like, I'm not trying to you know, start an entire revolution. But at the same time, as I got better and better jobs, and my parents are very instructive in this, like, it's just a lot of responsibility, right? A lot of responsibility. And happily, over the course of 16 years at ESPN, I find that I don't have to carry as much of that responsibility alone. Like, you know, Dominique works with brilliant leaders. In fact, I went into Dominique's newsroom one time, and I was like, my God, this is what it's like to be surrounded by us in a workspace. Like, you have to see the undefeated newsroom. You have to feel the joy, because it is just not like most places. It's just not like most places.
Oh, I miss it.
And so, yeah, I mean, that, and I really like, or it's like, you know, I don't know, for me, it's like when I go home to my family, right? But like, that's where you feel that safety and that sort of, you can be your complete self. I will tell you, I mean, it's an enormous amount of pressure, but it's also important to remember that there's somebody coming up behind you who should have it easier when they come through, right? So it's just been my other full-time job, honestly. Ironically, it's the one I can't check out of, right? It's the one I can check out of the other one, but this is the full-time job. So, you know, I've acted as a sounding board. I've spent a lot of time coaching up my white bosses. I've had to find the courage to close the door with my boss and say, all right, I'm gonna have a moment of clarity here for just a second. Are we good to do that? And even as we sit here right now, I'm on a really important, along with Kevin Merida, we're on a really important cross Disney panel of people thinking about ways to drive inclusion in our content, be more mindful of how we recruit people, make it be a place where people feel like they can come, like the Disney company writ large is a place that they can come and thrive. A lot of work to be done in our newsroom at ESPN, just because, you know, as Dominique said, this summer, like in workspaces and across society, we just said, look, enough. There's things we've been carrying that we haven't been able to articulate, that you haven't been willing to listen to, that, you know, we're kind of done. And so I hope that as the younger folks walk into these places of work, it's easier for them than it was. I hope people aren't duking it out like virtually every day, like I was in elementary school and junior high, you know. But I still feel like there's just a lot of work to do, you know. You know, we still have a path to go before we feel comfortable. It all feels fragile right now, right? We got everybody's attention, but now the question is it going to hold, right? And what do we have to do to sort of keep this consciousness present? And I do believe at ESPN we're focused on that. But you know, the newspaper I used to work at, Philadelphia Inquirer, they chased their boss out because they had a headline show up in the newspaper that said, "Buildings lives matter too." It was some architectural thing that they were doing, and they let that run on page one. And people were like, "Nope, you got to go." And so he, you know, out. And I feel like that's, you know, we're still in the heart of it, right? We're still in the heart of it. And the good news is that there are places like the Undefeated and Blavity and just up and coming businesses where they're our businesses and that we're kind of creating environments of our own. But I still feel like this is important work to do, because I would like the Disney company to be a place where, you know, Caleb Connick could walk in and get a job. You know, Mike could make a film, you know, Million could figure out what he wants to do. Like, I would like the Disney company to be that. So I'm just in the fray, you know, that's just it. I'm just in the fray.
Dominique, you want to add anything?
Any thoughts on that?
No, I can't. Like that was he covered all of it, and I've been obviously I live in America, so there's plenty of white spaces where I find myself the only black person. I think college quite a bit, but I've also been fortunate because like as a football player for a lot of time, it was pretty much all black locker rooms or mostly black locker rooms, and the people I worked with directly was defensive backs, all black most of the time, and then go from there to business school, which was pretty diverse. But I mean, it was 900 in my class, and it was people from all over the place, international, and there were some Black Americans there too that I found a community. But it was just 2 years, and then from there, the Players Association was mostly Black, and then I go to the Undefeated, which, as Rob talked about, that newsroom. It's like it feels like family reunion is what it feels like, and like there's so much history and so much cultural literacy that you don't need to catch people up on as the conversations skip right to graduate level Black conversations. Then you're just comfortable having these experiences with those people, and I loved it. And so I've been fortunate. So Rob, I can say that the fights that you fought have made things better for, at least for me, and I hope that'll be even better for the next generation.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I think that's a very important point that you've raised up. I think for people like you, Rob, and Dominique, people who've already made it, people like Chris as well, basically everybody that is not us at this point, I think y'all have a really big mantle that you have to pass on to us, simply because this country has not been created in a way where we can succeed without someone helping us up the ladder. You know? So I appreciate you guys doing that, and I hope that this progresses, you know, past the podcast and into, you know, bigger scopes.
That's why we're called Limitless, Mike.
Mhm.
We think limitlessly here, so we
That's
appreciate
what's up.
it.
Cool. Any more before we close out? So yeah, just Rob, Dominique, really appreciate you guys taking time out of your Saturday to join us. You know, for us, it's really special. Limitless, prior to this fall, we were focused on STEM, so science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and obviously with the pandemic, we've had to kind of pivot, and we're working on some virtual technology to be able to still, you know, bring our curriculum to our students at home. But in the meantime, we thought, you know, what else can we bring to our students? And so we launched the podcast incubator, and it's been dynamite with the help of the two of you obviously joining us today, Marcellus Wiley and Ryan Russillo, to get it off the ground and bring some really high level individuals to help us, you know, kind of bring the knowledge to our students and give them inspiration to hopefully reach where you guys are. So we really appreciate you guys taking this time today. And obviously we're just going to build from here. So yeah, if you guys don't have any more questions, I mean, that pretty much rounds it out, you know, for the fall session. We're going to bring it back in the early or February, March, Chris, around that time.
Yeah,
We'll bring it back. We'll expand.
Late January is what we'll target.
Yeah.
And you want to just
share? Yeah, sure. Yeah. So guys, what we're gonna do is this following week, basically the ball's in Ryan's court right now. So his team is going to edit all the podcasts